my name's Shelby Barnes, and I'm a third-year MCDM student. And I'm going to share a few of my insights from my 5 weeks in Namibia this August. But before I get started, does anybody here who has familiarity with Namibia? Great. So then, happy here to share some insights with those of you who don't, and happy to learn from you when we get toward the end. So first, before I go much into Namibia, I thought I should start with who I am and why Namibia. And nothing says I've been to Africa like a picture of yourself petting a cheetah. So my interest, I was a student in Anita's class last fall in emerging markets and digital media. And my interest really stems from that class. We had to do a midterm project looking at countries and developing countries who showed great economic promise. And part of that promise was, did these countries have what's known as a demographic dividend, where half of the population is of working age, between 15 or 24 or so? And Namibia fit that profile. And so that was the company I focused on, and the goal was to recommend, would this be a good investment to invest in Namibia? But it's impossible to do research on Namibia and not come across the HIV and AIDS stats. And it varies anywhere from 20 to 40% of the overall population is suffering from HIV or AIDS. And so looking at that stat and then looking at the youth, for my final project, I decided to look at whether there's any indication to show whether digital media is starting to impact HIV/AIDS behaviors of youth. What I didn't realize is that's a gigantic question, because we don't even know whether they're impacting youth here or anywhere, or how digital media is impacting business, or it's a big open question, but I narrowed in on Namibia. And so a little bit about Namibia and its demographics. It's a coastal country right above South Africa, bordered by Botswana, Angola, and Zambia, a little teeny bit. And it's a very big country with a very small population, 2.1 million people, over a landmass the size of Texas and Louisiana combined. And that factors in, interestingly, when we talk a little bit about how mobile communications in particular are shrinking the country. As I mentioned, the HIV/AIDS stat is quite significant. However, it's on the decline, and so that's really good news. It's a relatively new country. It's only been independent from South Africa for 21 years. That's also posing interesting challenges and observations, because a lot of change is happening, but people are really aware of it. Also, another interesting observation I made while I was there is that the framers of their constitution are still alive. And so that was something to really kind of internalize. While people, especially youth, were complaining about government and the fact that they're still resting on their laurels, I had to sit back and say, but they framed your constitution. They actually have accomplished something quite large, but it's interesting how everything speeds up. It's primarily an agricultural-based country and really rich in natural resources, but there is a lot of opportunity for technology and a really strong technology infrastructure. Also, the roads in Namibia are amazing, and I live in Ballard, and they are levels above the roads in Ballard. So lots of change going on. The other thing someone should know about Namibia before you go, which I didn't, is the house spiders there are gigantic. The spider was bigger than my hand, and so that scared me. So rest assured they're harmless, they assured me, so that's a good thing to know. So really, how are technologies impacting, particularly when we're going to look at mobile. So Namibians love their mobile phones. Anita was very familiar with Namibia and was actually the one who encouraged me to make the trip there, and just said, you're not going to believe, like, everybody is texting all the time. And she was absolutely right. And this is really having an impact on the culture, though. So as I talked about how big the country is, technology tends to shrink that. And what that means when I'm talking to different people when I was there is that people don't travel as much as they used to. And so maybe their auntie or their dad or their sister lives 8 hours away. Well, now maybe they text more often versus taking those road trips. And what that means is the impact it's having is people are starting to become more disconnected from their environment. And so as much as it brings opportunity, it's also disconnecting people a bit. It's also a very closely knit community. And so technology connects people, but it also intermediates as well, right? And so one of the opportunities I had was working with a young group of interns at an ad agency, and one of them said, I really think of it as anti-social media, because now when we get in a cab, which when you get in a cab there, everybody crams in, she said, people don't talk anymore, everybody's on their device and they're Facebooking or doing whatever. So I thought that was an interesting observation about the culture. There is a lot of opportunity, though, around business, education, and social issues, and obviously technology anywhere is not a standalone solution, but it is bringing some change about. One of the most interesting changes to me was the daily. So because I wasn't working, I actually had the opportunity to read newspapers every day from cover to cover. And one of the main newspapers in Namibia has SMSs for the day. So these are basically the letters to the editor. And And I met a colleague who works at Penn State, or studies at Penn State, and he actually did a research project just on this. It was his belief that this is the first newspaper in the world who does this, has this feature. And what it really does is offer a lens into the culture real time. And what I found fascinating is they printed everything from people's reactions to the news of the day to, hey, we live in this rural town and our stoplight's out, can somebody please come send somebody to fix our stoplight, to, I was in a taxi at this place, lost my wallet, here's my contact information. And it was really cool, they didn't discriminate, but after you read it over a couple of days, you could see which issues were resonating with people in the newspaper. And you also saw government and other administrations jump on change. So if there was a particularly hot issue, you'd start to see news where people were starting to jump on things, which may have gone ignored. The most interesting thing about this, though, to take away is it really brought a voice and gave a voice to people who maybe didn't have telephones, wouldn't have any other access or computers or awareness of what was going on. And journalism overall is really interesting in Namibia. It's a free press, but there aren't many dedicated journalists to beats, which means there's not a lot of deep expertise on news. There also aren't, there's not a personality culture around news or anchors or that sort of thing, where news is celebritized. One of the favorite people I met when I was there, his name is Brendan Imig, and interestingly, Anita met him over Twitter, I believe, and then I met him over Twitter, and then I met him in person. And he, to me, was the epitome of a digital entrepreneur for Namibia. And if Namibia is lucky, it'll be people like Brendan who help move it into its future. In his view, and I actually heard this sentiment from educators, from health workers, from business people, is the overwhelming belief in Namibia now currently is the internet is still primarily for predators and porn, right? And if you think it's about where we were maybe 15 years ago or so, and so there's a lot of fears around technology. And I guess when I think of Namibia, I think of it a bit as like a giant client who still needs to be convinced that it's okay, that there are still opportunities here, and by virtue of that needs to be shown the way on a lot of things. And Brendan is one of those people. He shared, he does digital media technologies and social media strategies, and it took him 18 months to convince a travel client that it was okay to have a Facebook page. And so move that to maybe a bank or something a little more serious business oriented, and the challenges are immense. He gave a presentation recently where the head of marketing of a digital telecom company basically told him she didn't understand the internet and she didn't understand digital media. And so to him that was somewhat frustrating, but it's also an opportunity. And so I check in with him every few weeks and kind of give him a little nudge and keep him motivated, and I think it'll be really cool to watch what he does. Talking a bit about the fear, I thought this was a funny article, but not too different than some of the press that we would see early on or that we still see, where there is a fear. And Facebook is huge in Namibia. In fact, the largest website on the continent was Big Brother Africa, the Facebook page for Big Brother Africa. And it's a platform that's really widely understood from youth to people in business who still don't understand it. And I think that marketers will probably take advantage of just copying that platform because it is really popular. Also, it was interesting going back to the SMS culture of Namibia. Twitter is not that popular yet among young people, which I thought was interesting. If you think of SMS and the character limitations, you would think Twitter would translate, but their view is really Twitter's for people who know things about the world and what's going on broader than your community, but Facebook is where I can talk to people who I know, and I thought that was fascinating. And so we'll talk a little bit about youth. As you'd expect, kids and youth are actively interacting. Obviously, mobile provides a lot more opportunity than PCs. That was an interesting observation in that PCs come with a lot of infrastructure. And Namibia, because it's only 2 million people, half of whom make less than $1 a day, there's not a lot of business opportunity for businesses that take a lot of infrastructure like that. And so mobile, but offers a different opportunity. You don't need all the tech support and all of the things that you would need with PC type infrastructure. I think kids and the culture at large is a lot more advanced than business and people who are creating products think. So I went there in search of seeing whether or not people were creating platforms for youth. And what I realized, the youth it's going to be just like it is here, they're creating them for themselves. There's also this notion, kind of scarcity beliefs around technology. I met with a man who did dance performance as a way to get the message through about different social issues. And he said, the internet can't replace this. And I said, well, of course it can, but it can extend it. And he made great magazines, and I looked on the Facebook page, and kids were saying, hey, can you put this online? And so I think it'll be interesting as business leaders start to connect with what their audience starts to ask of them. And the one interesting impact around technology is, I was talking with one of the health workers, and she mentioned that it is socially, it's becoming more acceptable to talk about HIV/AIDS openly in schools, at home, with each other. And she said, and it's kind of a shame because we're starting to have social comfort around it, but now technology is starting to take our youth away because kids are starting to be more on their mobile phones or their games or whatever. And I thought that was a really interesting challenge. So to watch what kind of tools and platforms help intermediate and bring people back together will be interesting. And so, and in talking with the two women on the left, or two of the interns who I worked with, and talking with them, I was really curious, how are you using platforms? Are you looking online for information? Are you looking for communities? And the answers were overwhelmingly yes, especially for things that embarrassed them. And more important though, and I think actually more cool, was they weren't just looking for information, they were looking for sharing information. They wanted to share and to help other people. And I thought that was a neat spirit to see arise. So how will those who want to move ahead meet the challenge? I think my biggest observation in Namibia was, just like everywhere, you have to show people, you can't just tell them. And I think the culture is evolving, business is evolving, technology is evolving, but in order to get people to keep up, you have to give them something to react to, and you have to give them a sense of a comfort of what you're talking about. I think especially when you talk about technology and tools, if you're in a more advanced area with those things, you understand what you're talking about. People need to see to be less afraid. I think that especially when you talk about the challenges, how technology is challenging status quo and culture, that tends to bring a lot more fear. And I think people need to see that they can coexist, that one is not necessarily at the expense of the other, but being aware of the impact that those are making. And I think that's about it.
Thanks, Shelby.